Hey everyone, and welcome to this in our series of St. T's Worship Hangouts, chatting to friends to keep us musically and spiritually sharp. It is my absolute pleasure today to welcome Sem with us. Sem is based over at Life Church in Bradford, and you may recognise his name as he's credited on the recordings that I've done with Christ the Rock and Holy Water. We worked together on those. Sem was incredible at helping flesh those out and give the song some identity, which we'll dig into a little bit as we go. But Sem, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me here. Good to be here. Nice to not see you, everyone, but maybe see you in the future.
Yeah, maybe one day. One day, when all this is over, we keep saying that to everyone, when all this is over, we're going to have like the biggest worship bash ever. It's going to get everyone who's been on these chats all together, and we'll have a massive worship session. It'll be cool. Sem, do you want to share with us a little bit about kind of who you are, how you landed maybe at Life Church, how you landed in the UK, and kind of musically what your background is, what do you do at the church, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so thanks for having me here. My name is Sem, and basically I've been in England, in Bradford, for about 9 years now. Originally, I'm from the Netherlands, which is why I've got this slight strange twang to my accent. I can't lose it for some reason. But basically, I came to Bradford, England, to do the Life Church College at Life Church in Bradford, and I found out about that at the time. I was actually quite disappointed in church, and I'd finished my A-levels, and I knew that I wanted to do something else with my life, and that I didn't just want to go into study. But then I didn't really know what, and I basically had some bad experiences in church, and I thought, well, clearly this church seems to be doing quite well, and they seem to be doing something that's very different to what I'm seeing around me. So that's kind of how I came to Bradford. And I guess, long story short, during that year, I guess I could say I probably fell in love with the church and the impact that church can have on a community all over again. So I finished the year, and I was involved in all kinds of areas, and just loved seeing every single part of the church. But at the end of the year, I didn't really feel like God was saying to me that I should stay, so I thought, well, then I'll go home. And I basically applied for a music college, studying jazz music, which was great, and I really enjoyed it. But I guess during that year, what I thought that would happen is that I would just be there back in the Netherlands, and all my connections to Bradford would just sort of fade out, because out of sight, out of mind. That was kind of the mindset that I had, maybe. And I realized that didn't really happen as much, and I was still speaking to a lot of the guys from the church often. I'd actually come over quite a few times to get involved in little things. So I think by the end of the year, I basically realized, wow, there's a real strong connection here, and maybe it's for more than just 1 year. So that's how I ended up, relocating back, and that was in 2012, I think. So that's, it's been a while now. But I guess long story short, musically speaking, I only started learning the piano from a friend in church back in the Netherlands when I was about 15, and I was always fascinated by the piano player, but I never actually dared to ask my mom if I could maybe have lessons. And that when I finally had lessons, I fell in love with it, and I absolutely loved it. And I learned to play chords, and then probably about 6 or 7 months later, someone asked me, hey, would you like to play in the service? And, so on. So I still feel like I'm just learning every day. But I guess, within Life Church, I got involved in the worship team quite fast, and then enjoyed doing that. Then I started, that's playing keys and piano. Then I started MDing a bit more, which is where you have the microphone and kind of helping to steer the ship a bit more. And then over time, I got more involved in songwriting and production. And I'm a bit geeky, so I just like learning about new things, and that's probably how I rolled into that. So and I'm still doing that now. And now I have the privilege since a couple of years to be on staff in Life Church, actually. And a lot of what I do in my work is to do with just running all things worship, and tying our conferences and our Sundays, and making that all work, but then also just looking after the people that we have in our team, and particularly the musicians and the auditions of new people. So all of those kinds of things. I'm sure that I could talk about this for 40 minutes by itself.
Yeah. No, but that's fantastic, Sam. Thank you. And just for people who maybe aren't familiar with Life and what you guys do, I think the first time I ever actually came across the Life Church was about maybe 5 or 6 years ago, for Excel, which is the men's conference. And you guys run how many conferences is it through the year?
It's probably about 4 or 5. It always seems I always lose count, but it's usually about 4 or 5 or something.
And they're quite significant in terms of scale, in terms of kind of build up and the kind of production level and the just the vision for them. I was always struck by that actually you guys as a kind of individual church, not part of an enormous kind of denomination as we are within the C of E, but like you guys are fairly sort of self-sustaining really, that you, as well as serving the church and serving your community, are still able to facilitate and run all these kind of conferences and all the songwriting and kind of production as well, which I think is just, incredible. How do you kind of make all that fit with obviously trying to keep the show on the road, if you like, on a kind of week-to-week basis or day-to-day basis, and kind of doing the stuff that you've mentioned about welcoming new people onto team, but then looking at the bigger stuff like making time for songwriting or making time for the kind of bigger conferences where you get thousands of people. I know for Cherish certainly that's probably the biggest one that you do, isn't it? And you know you fill the Leeds Arena, and you know, so how do you kind of balance that?
Wow, yeah, that's a good question. I think we often ask ourselves that question: how do we balance this? I guess, you know, it is a tension, and it's the language that we probably would use for it within our teams would be like, there is kind of like the local element of our church and then the global element, where I think there is a mandate on our church, for whatever reason we don't sometimes really understand why, to you know, to also be a resourcing church, that we feel there are maybe things that we do and that like God has blessed us with, that we hope are an encouragement to Christians around the country, to churches around the country and beyond that. And obviously, I guess, you know, the worship and the conferences, they all sit sort of in that realm where, you know, yes, we have great speakers that come as part of those conferences that blesses our church, but we also see how often, you know, churches can gather around things like that and be inspired by what they maybe see, what we do, or so. But I guess if I had to answer that quickly, I suppose there is a level where we ultimately, first and foremost, are a church for the people that are in our vicinity and in our, you know, physical region, because actually, well, that's what church is like. That's what it's for. It was never really meant to be all this big thing. But then I think within that, what we realized is sometimes when you put a stake in the ground and you say, you know what, we're going to go after this, we're going to go for this, we would like to record songs, and you know, and that started because we realized, hey, we were doing some of these things and we saw that it had a great impact in our church, and we just felt perhaps we should share these. And then we saw fruit from that and blessings from that people were, I guess, you know, echoing that of like, hey, what you guys are doing is really helping me in churches from around the country. So I suppose it's really started from that, but then I think the tension within it is that sometimes I guess, you know, it sets a benchmark of like, hey, we would like to do these things, and it therefore makes it clearer maybe what we go after sometimes, and that helps our scale level or our production level, if you wanted to break it down like that. But then I think sometimes it's also, there's an element to it where it is a tension, and we maybe feel, but we just want to make Sunday great. And so I don't think we've ever resolved it yet, and I suppose we'll never will. But I think that's, you know, the good thing is that sometimes we've had people who have maybe found out about our church through our events, or who have been really inspired by a creative thing that they did, and that ended up helping them to actually make the decision to come on a Sunday and to make our church their home, even though they live nearby. It's all those kinds of things. I don't know if that answers the question at all.
Yeah, it does. And yeah, I mean, I think certainly we can say that, you know, the way that we've connected as well has been
right. Yeah,
actually just gradually building relationship over those things. So yeah, I love what you guys do and what you bring. I think obviously for those kind of watching within our team and potentially within the team of other churches, if this video's got that far as well, I suppose we'll all probably sit on a different spaces on the spectrum of how what level of excellence we go after. The word excellence probably actually puts the hairs up on some people's back, even
Right.
using that term with regard to kind of church. And actually, there's always, I think, going to be, particularly in worship and music, where it is something that is, you know, a kind of art form and a form of entertainment outside of church as well. And actually we bring some of that into church, and the increased kind of use of technology and production and stuff. How do you guys, particularly less the sort of conference side, but more your kind of church side, where you have probably more volunteers serving within the teams and that kind of thing, how do you tread the balance of like wanting people to bring like their best and what God's gifted them in, and people to take that seriously, but equally like it not being like X Factor every week, for people to be part of the team? How do you kind of toe that line of what's expected of the team, but also kind of what culture you set within that?
Yeah, and I guess, well, it's a good question. I suppose, like, for us, you know, ultimately God is after our hearts in worship. Like, it's as simple as that. Like, he is not after a, like, you know, like a 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 flawless performance, because actually, well, that's not really, like, God wants our heart in worship. But then I think there is a level to it that, like, well, I think, you know, when we bring an offering of piano playing, of singing, of, you know, an offering of worship to God on a Sunday, I suppose, like, you know, we want that to be a valuable thing, and we want that to be something that's, you know, that's cost us something, that we, you know, that we really, like, have been digging for to bring to God. And I suppose that's probably where I guess, you know, maybe the word excellence, because I know what you mean. It's not always it can feel a little bit like, oh, we just want it to be great, and everything needs to be bang on nailed. And it's like, well, yeah, I suppose that's one expression of excellence, but it's actually just, I guess, that we really carry worship and what we do with the way that we believe, you know, the weight that we believe that it deserves. Like, and actually we want to bring God a very precious gift. And that also means that we want it to be good, and that we want it to be, you know, really, like, pleasing musically as well. Like, because it's, I think, in the same way that we, I guess, you know, we find this easier when we look at art, and we can come to, like, Rome and look at all the beautiful, like, murals and things. And it's, well, like, that was someone's life work, or sometimes across generations in the case of, like, cathedrals. And that's why now we still look on it, and we're like moved by it, and impressed by it, and inspired by it. And I guess, like, you know, like, we would want to take that level of seriousness, you know, to our worship. Obviously, because it happens week to week, it's different. But I think there is a level to it that, like, we don't want it to just be a thing that we fall into, I suppose. If I brought it down to that, a simple, we're quite intentional about how we would like to make sure that it's something precious and valuable that we bring.
Yeah. And I suppose within some of that as well, that's kind of where I'm imagining anyway your role on staff kind of sits within, because there's a few of you, isn't there, that are kind of employed on staff team, if you like, within your church setup.
Right.
Obviously at St. T's, in our context, it's just myself, but for you guys, there's a few of you, and I suppose your role, from what I've seen anyway, is the kind of managing the kind of behind the scenes, the musicality, helping run making sure that people know what they're doing, and all that kind of stuff. What do you look for in your team, either when you're kind of recruiting people, or when you're looking at, actually, is someone thriving here, or is someone struggling a bit here? What would you say, like, the core kind of markers are within a healthy worship team?
Yeah, so I guess, great question. Funnily enough, I would probably answer this on several levels, but I would say, well, ultimately, what do we look for in team? The very first thing is probably just people that are available and that are happy to be involved. And I think particularly on musicians, like, you know, maybe people would look at what we do and think, wow, like, you must have musicians for days. And the truth is, like, not really, because also, like, as our church has grown, and the amount of services that we do, and venues, and we have a prisons ministry, and we have a ministry that does kids worship, and, you know, the demand has also increased. So I think on a very basic level, well, which people love, would just love to be involved and are willing to sacrifice time to just come down to rehearsals or things like that. Then obviously, I guess there is I would even say for us, sometimes we look at, hey, what people would maybe coming to the worship team create a great connection to be, to feel like they're around some great friendships, and they can build like friendships as well. And obviously we want people that join, that are part of our worship team to know God. But I think for some people, like, that process has actually started by them getting involved in worship team, and then over time realizing, like, oh wow, like this is something that's for me as well. But that's different. But I guess then there's a second level where really practically, I suppose, we do look for people that also have a gifting and a skill. But what that looks like is different for every single person. So for some people, maybe like what they are good at is, there may be, like, I guess they would say, I'm okay on guitar and I'm happy with that. And then someone else is, outstanding on guitar, but that's the only thing that they love, and they absolutely, like, they live up to play. They wake up in the morning and they play guitar, and they go to bed playing guitar. But for someone else, it's not like that. So I guess we try to, within both those, then work out, like, we would want both those people to feel like they can be part of the worship team, but probably what it looks like, and maybe how often they get involved, or in what capacity, or in, what things we put on their shoulders might be different. We try to, and I suppose that's really where I come into play, I suppose, is that I try to work out, okay, so we've got these things coming up. Well, which guitarist, if I talk about guitarists, would actually really enjoy what's being asked of them, and maybe for which guitarist is it too hard? And then I suppose, ultimately, sometimes it doesn't work, and we just use the people that we have available. But then I suppose there's a level where also what we can create is situations where people just really enjoy being part of the team, but they also get to be challenged and inspired by what they see. And this is even where conferences come into play. Like, at our conferences, we might do something creative or something vocally that then really inspires our singers to step up in something, or to feel like, oh wow, I really want to learn how to do that. And it opens those conversations.
Yeah. And I think for all of us, probably, like, having people around us, or even people in the past where, like, we've often kind of got into worship, or we've kind of seen people that we've gone, oh, I'd love to be at that level.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not idolizing that, but it's a sense of kind of just using that to kind of keep you on a bit. And I've certainly found that really helpful in my faith walk, and my walk in worship, certainly. The other thing I just really wanted to kind of dig in, which kind of goes, I suppose, the next level on from that, is when we're bringing what we have to offer in worship. And I'm saying this very aware that people are busy. All our teams are volunteers, and people give of their time very generously. And I don't want, in our situation anyway, to end up like shrinking the team, because there's so much level and weight of, oh man, I've got to have that part for that song, and I need to suddenly invest like thousands of pounds in all this gear to make it sound right, and I need to learn, like, just constantly, it feel like you're constantly rehearsing, but equally, like, I don't feel like we're a people that are called to just come and kind of have a go and busk along. And I just wanted to pick your brains, really, Sam, as to whether there's maybe it's for different instruments, or different kind of, there's different techniques, but how would you say for those maybe that feel like they're kind of busking along a little bit, or they feel like they can play their instrument to a level, or they can sing to a level, like, how do we, in our own musicality, kind of push on, and without it becoming like overly performed or overly glossy, but like, how do we develop in a worship context in our musicality?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it is, I suppose, comes down to, like, you want to just really love what you do, and I think, like, that's the most important part. I want to make sure that anyone who's in our worship team is just really enjoying what they do. Now, that doesn't mean it's always easy or everything is always great, but I think, things that you really care for, you probably are more willing to sacrifice for and to make investments into. So I think that's on one level. But then I think a lot of times, I guess what I would ask myself, or for anyone who's listening to this, is like, okay, well, what worship do you really enjoy listening to or watching on YouTube, and why is that? And I think, like, a lot of times, if I look back on the things that have inspired me, like, it doesn't even have to be worship, it could just be music. Like, I've enjoyed back in the days listening to some of the early United albums, because it was such a fresh sound, and it was just so different. And then I've enjoyed Bethel because they've just got such a strong atmosphere in what they do. And I guess, like, work out, like, what do you really like and why do you like it, and then ask yourself the question, okay, like, what could I perhaps maybe work on in my own instrument, whether that's voice or a musical instrument, to maybe help support getting to bringing some of that, what I really like, back into the worship team here. And I think, therefore, like, for example, when it comes to keyboards, okay, you know what, actually sometimes it can really help when there is a pad to add a bit more width and atmosphere to it, rather than just a piano sound. Like, that would have started for me because I heard it somewhere else and I thought, I wonder how to do that, like, that sounds cool. And then you slowly try to bring it on board. And then I think within that, there is probably a level where you want to make sure, particularly when you play other people's songs, there is often a reason that they've been written in a way that that was really moving and it really touched me. And there was a guitar part that was like that, or there was a vocal way of singing singing it. And obviously some of that is in how the recording has been put together, and I suppose the production side of it. But I think if you sort of take that layer off and you think more of the elements, like, and any song is the sum of its part, and worship is not different to that. Like, a worship song on a Sunday or recorded is always the sum of the things that have gone into making that, and therefore, like, every part together creates that sound. So I think sometimes we've got to just acknowledge, okay, like, if I really enjoy a certain song, then I probably need to pursue the parts that have gone into that to work out how I can maybe bring that sound back somewhere else. And I suppose if I then extrapolate that, it's not even sometimes so much, although songs are good for inspiration, but then you realize, oh wait, but like, when I use these tips and tricks, for example, or this musical approach to something, it really helps to settle the atmosphere in church when we play, or it really helps to make things sound better when we play together. And I think if everyone does that, you realize, like, stuff starts locking into each other much better. And obviously that comes down to the musical parts, but that's where then equipment comes into place. And I suppose within that, that's where we then have to realize as well. But we are still, we're not, like, your worshiping won't be any different to ours. Like, we are still ultimately regular people bringing our gift to God, and therefore, like, we're not going to be session musicians that show up and it's the world's best equipment, the best gear. Like, hey, some of us, like, haven't got money to maybe buy the pedal that they would really like to have. But I think when you know what you're enjoying and what you want to go after, you definitely find yourself working out, but what can I do with what I have, and how can I maybe make provisions to like really capture what I really enjoyed in that song, to bring some of that into our church service on Sunday, maybe in the same song when you play someone else's song, or in your own songs, something that really moves. And I think that then helps you to work out, what to invest in, or what to spend your time on preparing, all those kinds of things.
Yeah, that's really, really helpful. That's, really well put. And I think, for me anyway, the beauty of, like, playing, the more I've played in church, and the more I've started to kind of press into, whether it's like guitar technique or drumming technique or keys technique, I don't profess to be the best on our team, let alone in the world, any of this stuff. But, like, I think you start to then realize that there's certain threads of, like, commonality that run, if that's the right word, that run between different songs. And you start to realize, actually, like, there's certain ways of playing chords, or there's certain fills on drums that just either just sound right or just sound wrong in different things, don't you? And you start to work out, like, oh, that progression sits really nice there, or that way, or that shape even of just playing that chord, or there's there's like a little extra note you can leave in sometimes, or this pattern on the guitar, and you start to then work out like a bit of so you're not starting from scratch on every song, but you start to kind of work out like, do you guys find that as well?
Massive. And I suppose like music is no different to, in a restaurant, they will suggest you red wine with some meals and white wine with others, or, or grape juice, whatever you prefer. Or, in racing, for different types of like surfaces, you'll have different tires that go with it, because it just seems to work well. And I think music is the same. Like certain genres of music will come with certain sounds and approaches to the music and how you play that seem to support that and that seem to work it. And I think this is where, I again, like I said, like a song is the sum of its parts. Now, I guess the challenge is, and this is what we therefore talk about often. Well, we don't actually talk about it that often, but I think what we definitely would talk about, if it needs to be talked about, is, okay, so if we have a certain song, there will usually be certain parts that go with it to make it that song. And I think that will then express in every instrument, I guess, in a set of like values, or I guess pointers or guidelines of, okay, hey, to play these kinds of songs, these things really work and these things are not so compatible with it. For example, a really like jazzy loop will sometimes be very distracting in a song by Bethel, because it's almost like it's not one of the parts that makes that song. Vice versa, if you play a gospel song and you just hit everything exactly on a chord, it will probably feel really plain. And I guess this is the hardest part, because then often the question is that then comes with it, is it, but then does this remove all my creativity and I can't be myself and I can't express myself? And I think like the truth is, it's probably a fine line. Like there is certainly space for expressing yourself, but I think you've got to ultimately be able to put that, like, to be able to play a part really close to how it was, maybe intended by the person that wrote that part or by the person that put the song together, I think that's a skill by itself, to just be able to play in different genres really well and replicate those things. But then I think it's sometimes, I think what you'll find is it's the understanding of the overall approach of a song and what parts make that song, that when you sort of get your head around that, you then find yourself to, that you can translate that more into the free worship moments or in another song, or you realize like I can express myself and how I play, but it still somehow is really compatible with what the song maybe needs. And I think that's really big, because I think like the challenge is when you talk about like, hey, we need to learn the parts of the song. Now that's true, but I think when you then just learn the parts to the song, but without the real sort of bigger picture thinking of how does this then work together, then as soon as that song finishes, you'll find yourself clueless again for the next song that comes up. Or, well, clueless is maybe an extreme way to put it, but I think like, and we've really had to work on this in live church, is that like we've kind of stopped learning sometimes a song a week, because we used to do that, but then we found like that song would then be great, but then the rest would sometimes be a bit of a like, well, a mix, successes and not big successes. But I think because it's actually, well, and it's for the same reason, like when you change keys or tempos or things like that, you don't want to then be stuck on, but I haven't learned the part in this key, although that will probably come up sometimes. But actually, okay, you might not even play the right part, but the sort of thing, the shape, what you're aiming for, the feel of what you're doing. For example, I guess in our style of music that we play in live church, often we would say the drums are relatively spacious. There is a lot of space, the very clear grooves. The bass player then locks in with that. The keys will often support, a bed around it. The guitar will often have like, very distinct lead line. And then the second electric, if we have one, we don't always have that, will then play supporting part. And there's basically all these sort of like rough values of like, this is usually where we sit. And that means that if someone hasn't learned the part, or a song was spontaneously changed, then you can still kind of adapt to it because you'll understand, but you know what, I maybe, like, if I brought it back to the wine example, you might say, okay, well, I maybe haven't got a Merlot wine, whatever. I'm not even a wine expert, but I understand that this should have a dark wine with it, for example, and that just really helps because then you understand. Okay, you know what? Like, I haven't learned the part to this specific song, but you understand. But what I think I do need to do is not play a lot of notes because actually this is a spacious song and it's supposed to create space for reflection. And actually, if I add a reverb pedal, it then adds width to the sound and it helps to like make it settle more and shimmer. And all those sort of thinking processes then really help to translate it. I don't know if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. Yeah, no, that's...
Yeah, I'll actually chip in one more thing because maybe if singers are watching this, they might be thinking like, "What is this guy talking about? Like, is he from Amsterdam?" But I think for singers, this also plays into part because although you might not understand the musical terms that I've used, but I think it's sometimes what it does help you is when you can work out, okay, but what is my role as a singer in a song? Should I actually support what's being sung, or maybe I should just sing O's or A's? Like in that level, there is probably, I think a singer still plays a role in all of that. If everyone sings the melody, it's not sometimes that pleasant to listen to, and for that reason, you'll find a lot of the music that you and me would probably enjoy listening to often has like quite a clear vocal leader and then a harmony. There might be a second harmony, or then there is more of a gang sound, but it's quite distinct. But then I think also for a singer, and particularly for the worship leaders of you, to be able to put words to that of like, hey, but I can hear that the music is a lot more spacious than what you are playing, for example, or than what I'm hearing from the team, and those kind of understandings can help you to shape what you maybe are feeling in the spirit where something needs to go, or an idea that you have in your head of what you would like to achieve from on a Sunday service. It can help to then have words to sort of put language to that. So even for singers, I would say, like, don't switch off when people talk about music, because you might well find yourself needing the vocabulary to then be able to speak to the musicians. So
yeah, that's incredibly helpful. And I think there's certainly been a few conversations I've had, particularly with vocalists, actually, because I think sometimes, I don't know if you guys find it as well, that when the band turn up and plug in and start playing, the singers can sometimes get a bit lost in terms of the arrangement, and sometimes it can be quite heavily dominated by kind of musicians working out, oh, I'll play this part and I'll play this here and need this rhythm here, and suddenly you think, oh man, we've done like half an hour of practice and I've not even thought about what we're singing yet. I think as we've tried to be more creative with finding ways of utilizing different voices, a few people have mentioned that it can feel sometimes a little bit formulaic, where, again, probably because there are formulas that Hillsong or Bethel or Elevation or whoever, Life Church, dare I say it, might use when they're putting their music together that we listen to. And, where it's like, oh, it might be that the male worship leader sings verse 1 on their own, and then the singer always comes in on the chorus with a harmony and then maybe drops out of and it can feel a bit like, oh, well, I never sing in a verse, but I always sing in a chorus. Like, how do you guys manage that in terms of particularly thinking vocal parts, where it doesn't become overly like we just have a set formula of you do this then, not then? And I guess it's a similar kind of process, but how in a particular vocal context, where do you find, particularly with male and female voices, how do they find their part in the mix?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the really simple answer would probably be, well, what feels great, like what's really enjoyable, and I think sometimes if it's really enjoyable to sing in a certain way or in a certain arrangement of, hey, when we all start here, that feels really great. You'll find like often things will slot in with that. But a lot of times it's not sometimes that clear. I don't know what feels better, or maybe how are we going to do this? And I think you're right. I guess, like, although it can be helpful to look at, like, the reference and say, well, okay, the guy is singing by himself for the first part and I'm only hearing you here. Okay, well then I think if you're finding, because that's helpful, because I guess what you get to go off is you get to use the experience of the production crew and the musicians and all the talent that has put a song together that you've enjoyed listening and that you now want to do in your church. by listening to what they're doing vocally or musically, you're almost tapping into their wisdom and therefore applying that to your context. So I think that's always a good thing to do. But I totally understand, like, it can feel a little bit like formulated or a bit like static after a while. And I think if that's what you feel, then I guess my challenge would be, okay, well, sometimes you're just going to say, hey, like, can we change the key up? Because maybe that would allow us to like, start the verse with a female lead, and then the guy can come in the chorus, or like things like that can really help. And I think the more that you then do that, what you'll find yourself falling back on is I guess more the general approach, rather than, okay, it needs to be like this, or we're going to do it exactly this specific way. But you'll almost have like an understanding of, okay, like, what does this song require of us? Like, Cornerstone, for example, Hillsong, like, amazing song. Like, it's going to be the most played wedding song in the world.
Yeah.
But then, like, what you'll find is that there is a certain sound that comes with that I don't think dictates it needs to be a female in the start or a male in the start at all. But there will be a level where it's like, hey, actually, perhaps that verse just really doesn't lend itself to be sung with everyone together at the same time. Like, and I think when you can, like, identify things like that, you know what, the big chorus at the end, Christ alone, cornerstone, like all of those things, you know what, that would actually sound really beautiful if we could do that together. And I think that can then help to sort of, help you work out how to navigate it. And then the question for musicians is, okay, well, are you going to play the piano part with what sort of sounds? Why are you then doing that? How does it help? How are singers feeling supported by what they're hearing? Like, all of those questions are really good questions to ask each other in a rehearsal context.
Yeah, that's incredibly helpful, Sam. Thank you.
All right.
I think we're probably exhausting the time on this chat. Just before we finish and sign off,
yeah, we can always start a second call if
we
if
can
need
always
to be more
start.
questions.
I just wanted to talk a little bit about the creative aspect of what you guys do as a church as well. I know you're a very modest man, but you are at kind of production and arrangement level. It's often that's part of your role, isn't it? Kind of crafting and bringing identity to the songs that you guys have done. I know you've been involved in several albums, 4 or 5 albums out of the church.
Yeah, probably about 5 now. Yeah,
5. And I know some of those have been UK bestsellers across, certainly across the UK in the Christian charts. So it's pretty kind of significant stuff that you guys are doing. I'm sure those songs have really ministered to people all over the world. And how do you guys as a church kind of harness that creativity? I know there's some people within our team who enjoy songwriting, and I suppose it kind of sits under the radar as a bit of a hobby, probably for people. How do you then bring that into being actually really bringing out, like in the context of your church, actually giving real voice to stuff that's significant? And then I suppose crafting a song from being something that you kind of dreamt up in your sleep or sat around in your bedroom and put together to being at a point where you're actually bringing it to the church and saying, here's an expression of what we do. Like what's the kind of process that you...
Now we haven't, I wish that we had a written down process for this, but we don't. It's very organic. I guess a couple of things I would say would be, we, as the leaders maybe of the worship team, we would stir creativity and encourage creativity and people songwriting or recording things, but we can't do it for people. And I think there is definitely a big level where, like, I think the people that end up maybe writing songs that we then sort of take forward are often people that have such a big drive for it that, like, not in an offensive way, but kind of they'll crack on anyway, regardless on, whether or not I've asked them about how they're getting on with their songwriting. Like, they're kind of just like, they care about it so much that, like, it's just something that's coming off their chest all the time. Now, and that's it, particularly in nowadays, how everyone is so busy, that's a real stretch. And I think even for myself, like, I had the privilege to be on staff in church helping, with some of these processes, but actually I still have to make massive investments of time outside of my like paid time, so to say, to get some of the ideas of my chest, to shape and sharpen what I want to do, and how I maybe feel I can support things, all of that. But I think then secondly, I think a really big one, particularly when it comes to songwriting, but I think in other fields the same thing will apply, is that you have to ask yourself, okay, like, is this thing that I'm brewing on and working on, is it for the church, or is it actually one of your little projects or things that you maybe are just getting off your heart? And that's just as good. It's not less valuable or anything like that. But perhaps it's maybe just a personal thing for you, and it means something for you or for the people in your world. Or what are like songs for the church? And I suppose, and then even there's another level where it's like, but what are songs for the church with a capital C, like beyond your own church? So, and I think like, for us, because basically we say to anyone in the team can write songs, and then we kind of say, if you have anything that you feel is, maybe something that you want to share, send it in. Now, the only thing that we do say with it is we ask people to finish a song before they send it. Now, that doesn't mean that maybe in a friendship level, someone might say, hey, I'm working on this, what do you think of it? But more like, by the time that you say, here's a song and I want to bring it to the church, what do you think of it? We ask people to finish it, because finishing is almost as important as doing it, because finishing is much harder. But then I think with that, probably what I would say is, like, when people then send it in, I guess we've already have an expectation that they then also therefore believe that the song is something that maybe would bless the wider church and that would bless our worship on a Sunday. And I think if it's not obvious from listening to the song or from what the song is about, that it's maybe something for the wider church, then we'll just get back to whoever sent it and say, hey, like, is this a song that you have intended for church? If yes, you should probably make it more clear. Like, this is a congregational song. This is something that we would sing together in a service. Or perhaps maybe you haven't really thought about it. Do you want it to become a song like that or not? Because some amazing songs are great to listen to, but they're maybe not the best songs to sing on a Sunday. But I think I definitely would say, for anyone in a creative world, whether it's songwriting or something else, like craft on it, spend time on it, and like just produce things and create products, even if they're maybe not very good or you don't think they're there. But like, you gotta sometimes just have a lot of mediocre ideas to get a really great idea. But then I would say with that, like, commit to at least, once every season, and how often that season is will probably very much depend on how much time you have. But like, for some of you that might be once a month, some of you it might be once a year, once a week for some of you. Like, commit to finish one of those ideas that you've had, and just, regardless of whether or not you still feel passionate about it, just say, you know what, I'm just going to finish this idea because it'll be good. Like, and I still have to tell myself this, like, it's much easier to move on to someone else's idea, or to just let go of an idea, but to actually say, you know what, I'm just going to finish it because it'll be good. It's really hard.
Yeah, I know. I remember someone once, I can't remember who it was now, saying that you sometimes have to go through like 20 mediocre songs before you get one, and I think it can be really easy to look at, even possibly for people to have looked at what I've written as well and brought, and think like, there's a couple of songs that we're using that I've written that we're using at St. T's, and kind of looking and going, oh, it must have been really straightforward or whatever, and you don't see the hours and hours and hours and hours of crashing the ideas around. You don't see the 25, 30 voice memos of other song ideas that have come in between. And, like, I know for me, I often have like 6 or 7 songs on the go at any one time, like in kind of pieces and fragments, and like whether they actually come to it be something for the church, or whether that's, as you say, something that's just like, that came out of my devotional this morning. I put a chorus on it. I'm not feeling it anymore, so I'm going to park it and move on to something, or whatever it is. Like, there's something that comes with that time investment, isn't there? Definitely.
Yeah, and I think like it's the same for us, and it's probably when you're not close to something, you might not always see that. So like, for example, we're releasing an album late May, and the album has 14 songs on it and one spoken word kind of track. Now, that'll be hopefully you'll enjoy listening to it. But what you'll like, what the people in our church wouldn't maybe know, like some people in our church would be like, hey, but I heard you play this song once, and where did that go? Like, there's maybe that level, but then like people in our church don't even know. Like, so like altogether, like in this album coming together, we had a list of about 50 or 60 songs that were like finished songs. Like some of them even had big demos, and you could feel them. They were like, they sounded complete, but we just didn't think they were the best ones. Now, and then out of that 50 to 60, there was maybe 20 or 24 kind of songs that ended up at some point being played in a service somewhere. And then out of those, we ended up like deciding what we think these 14 songs are the best ones to record. But man, it's like there's so much lost time, so to say, in all those like unused ideas. But you just got to believe they were still part of a bigger thing. And I think like for anyone doing creative things, you can't look at like the amount of ideas that you use and they didn't go anywhere. You've got to like look at like, okay, but is there development? And like hopefully you could look back in 1 or 5 years time on what you're investing in now, and at least you can see, hey, but actually I've sharpened my skill, and like what I'm enjoying listening to them anymore. Now, and I think sometimes like the question of like, but I didn't get this insane idea. It's just not like, it's not worth sometimes thinking about. Just like enjoy the process, enjoy doing it. And I think whenever we always say to anyone like bringing a song like to me, or like if they email it in, we always say like carry it open-handed. Like don't hold it like this, because you'll very quickly break it yourself, or you'll, as soon as anyone tries to move it, you get really precious about it. And it's like, just like make it, again, even songwriting or creativity, it's an offering. And I think just because one person didn't buy into your idea doesn't mean that your idea is not good. It might just not be suitable. All those kinds of, but it's because it's a product for myself. It can be very emotional, and there's a lot of attachment that comes with it.
So. Yeah, that's really helpful. So yeah, make sure you check out the album coming out. I know at the point of recording this anyway, there's a few singles out. I'm loving those. I think they're on our playlist for church anyway. But yeah, we've been loving what you guys are bringing in, the way that you're resourcing, and the amount of time and effort and finance and everything else that goes into putting that together. You know, it doesn't go unnoticed. So thank you guys for
appreciate that.
The way that you're serving the wider church as well. So yeah, Sam, thank you so much for your time.
No problem.
Hopefully we'll get you across in person at some point to give us a proper kind of masterclass and in some elements of musicality. But we've really appreciated your time today. Thank you.
Awesome. No problems. Thanks, guys.